Here's a walkthrough of how to create an arc diagram using the SVG chart component in Gramix. The first step is to create an SVG in PowerPoint, which is basically creating any kind of shape. It could be absolutely anything. And so what I have here is, let me ungroup this. So we have a bunch of circles and a couple of arcs. So we'll use this as an illustration. I'll change their strokes, shape outline. Let's remove that to no outline and make these, let's say, have a white outline. So now that we have this, you can select the whole thing and save it as a picture, which will be in the SVG format. I'm going to save it in the arc folder as an arc.svg file. Now that this is done, I can open this arc.svg. Oh, okay. Yeah, open the arc.svg and you see the white outlines and exactly the same thing that we have here. If I edit this as a file, this is what arc.svg looks like. Let's format the document. So it has a series of these paths. Now, each of these paths correspond to one of these shapes here. So in exactly the order in which they are created. So the lowest shape would be the which is the highest one. Okay, I don't really know what order they get exported in, but we'll have to figure that out by trial and error. Now for each of these, we can assign an ID. So I'll say this is ID is equal to arc1, for example, and ID is equal to arc2, and so on. I'm going to just leave it with these two arcs. Then in any HTML page, we can start by importing Lodash and UI Factory. Specifically with UI Factory, we import chart.svg. Now the chart.svg.html should be present in our local directory, the same directory as where index.html is, or you can put it under some other folder, let's say components / if chart.svg were present there. So this will import the chart-svg component, which we can use anywhere on the page. To this, we pass two parameters. The first is the source, which is a file we want to use as the SVG file. That in this case is arc.svg. And whether we want any data to be updated. So by default, if I don't do any of this and just say chart.svg, sorry, chart-svg, and load index.html, what I get is exactly the same SVG. Now I can start coloring this based on some data. So let's say we have a data set that has, let's say, let's call this X. And X has a color of, let's say, yellow. And we specify a rule inside it that says that the selector arc1, so hash arc1, has a fill that is based on data.x. Now we've defined a rule saying arc1's fill should be based on data.x, and that happens to be yellow. So let's reload that, and yeah, arc1's fill is in yellow. Similarly, if I put in arc2 having a, I don't know, let's say stroke, which is based on data.y, and that can be, let's say, y is black. So arc2 has a stroke that is black. Let's make that fill again. So yeah, so that's in black. Now I can choose to change the colors of these directly using JavaScript. So for example, let's take this particular selector component. So this is chart SVG. So I'll set the data of, let's say, y to green and l dot update. Sorry, I should have done a l dot data. I'll rework this in the component later. But if I set the y to be, let's say, green and do an l dot update, that sets this value to this whole thing to green. Let's change the x to pink and update the element. So that changes. So now in order to change the color of this component. All we have to do is change the data values. It's also possible to change other attributes such as, let's say, stroke width, for example. Let's say I put that as 10 and the stroke as well, data.x, and that explicitly sets a stroke width and color based on the data. So we can change practically any aspect of this component.